As a parent, there is nothing we want success for more than our children. As a dad of four kids, I live this daily. When they do good, we feel great. When they suffer or struggle, we suffer and struggle, not just personally, but as a whole family, we do it together. So if you have a child that's overwhelmed with large crowds, that struggles in stressful, overstimulating situations, or is constantly touching things or not really recognizing personal space, that can not only be frustrating for you as a family, but it can be just heartbreaking to watch those sensory struggles that impact them in those situations. Now, there's no one size fits all for SPD or sensory processing disorder. It's a condition that affects just so many stimuli, right? It can do all five: taste, touch, smell, vision, and hearing. So if your child is struggling with SPD, you already know the effects of it. Today, I want to unpack for you in this video the tests and how we measure it. And you heard that right. We can actually test and see what's going on within their sensory nervous system. So that way we can find it, quantify it, and get to work with how to help them. Because if we can calm that underlying sensory system, then the world around them isn't so overstimulating. So I really want to walk you through this. And the first thing we really want to start with, even before we get into that test, is what is the root cause of sensory processing disorder? And this is something that as a pediatric chiropractor, I dig into parents every single day. Now, SPD, you can really break it down into two main phases. Either there's the sensory seeking where they want heavy blankets, they want big hugs, they want to feel and sense their environment around them. Oftentimes, these kiddos are chewing on their shirt, they're chewing on a pencil, putting things in their mouth, not understanding personal space as much. And then there's the other side of it. There's the sensory avoidance where loud noises are really stressful, where, oh, please don't cut my hair, please don't touch my neck, please don't brush my teeth. I just can't handle that. I'm overly sensitive to the world around me. Now, when the brain develops in utero, one of the first things that develops is that sensory system. This happens because it's so much in this lower brainstem within the neurospinal system that when that develops, and this already starts to come online in utero, so it starts to program and starts to connect to what that sensory system is going to look like. So if there's a lot of stress in utero, emotionally, physically, space constraint, that can impact their sensory system. Another big trigger is birth intervention, whether it be a C-section, whether it be an induced pregnancy, whether it be forceps, vacuum, a difficult, tough birth process or delivery puts a lot of extra stress and strain on that upper cervical spine. Now, this area, the upper cervical, occiput, so the base of the skull, all the way down to right here, C5, has so many sensors that we call proprioceptors. These proprioceptors pick up the sensations that happen in the world around us, and they either tell our brain to respond to them or to block them out. Now, so many kids that struggle with sensory processing disorder, they are just getting overwhelmed with signals in a way that the air traffic control right here at the base of the neck, the base of the spine, those gatekeepers can't keep that sensory stimuli out. And it's very overwhelming to the rest of the brain. The brain is confused, it's disorganized, and how it responds is to say, hey, I'm scared of it, or I really want to experience it to make me feel more comfortable. Now, this feeling, when that goes into the brain, it's not proprioceptive. It's not the feeling of, okay, I can understand the world around me. It actually turns to nociception. And the word, that we call that is really noise. It's just a lot of noise that's communicating to the brain. That's why so many of our kids are hearing when they struggle with sensory processing disorders. They literally feel noise from the outside world and it just overwhelms their sensory system. So, how do we dig into this? How do we measure what our kids are feeling on the outside, but really show it on the inside? Well, the answer is looking at it through the lens of what their body is doing, not just how they're feeling, but truly how they're functioning. That's why we really go into these test because we can look at it and say, okay, what is the body saying? That's sending the signals up to the brain. So I want to show you these three tests that help us measure a sensory processing system. What goes wrong in them, how we can improve them to help that sensory processing system be so much calmer. So what I've done is I've switched views here for you guys, and this is a view of what we call our neurological insight stress scans. Now, these neurological scans, what they look at is communication from the body and the brain. So it shows where a nervous system in the body is stressed out, and then the signals that it's sending up to the brain. Now, this first scan over here is what we call a neural thermal scan. Now, thermal, just think of temperature. We've all heard about thermography for different things. It's a wonderful thing to really look at for our kids to tell us how severe that neurosensory system is and to find out where that's primarily located. So we can track it. We can see what areas of the nervous system are struggling. Now, this thermal scan looks at temperature differences from side to side, from the right side over here to the left side over here. Now, these different areas within our neurospinal system, they control different systems, organs, and glands. So stress down here in the lower region, that might be more digestive or vagus nerve or hormonally be involved. When we get up here into the shoulder area, that's our sympathetic response. That's our stress response. When we get up into the upper neck, that's what really goes with sensory processing disorder, because this is truly the gatekeeper to the brain and to those upper levels of cognitive function. So that's the thermal scan, and that helps us really see the localized systems, organs, and glands that really affect that neurosensory system. Now, secondly, we look at what we call this neurospinal EMG. So first being the thermal, the second being the neurospinal EMG. This scan measures, and what we look at is called tension or energy. Now, most often we think of tension, we associate it with pain. But remember earlier in this video, I mentioned nociception and proprioception, so noise. Think about this more as energy, or that noise that the body feels that it's sending to the brain. So when we have areas in this that are more stressed, that are more blown out, that's sending signals upward to the brain that can be very overwhelming to that brain. It can be nociception. So that energy is effectively telling the brain to work extra, extra hard and not feel comfortable in that environment. So it gives us a good idea of the regionality of not just the tension in the child's body, but the amount of energy that's flowing up to the brain. Now, this third scan might be my favorite one here. This is heart rate variability, or HRV, and it's something we use as adults quite a bit. We use it on our Apple Watches, our Oura Rings, or Whoop bracelets. We track it a lot of times if we exercise or trying to just live healthy, but it's actually an awesome test we can use for our kids too. It tells us really two main things. In this upper down portion here, we're looking at essentially how hard their nervous system is working. And wouldn't we want to know that? Because most of the time when kids get upset, they get frustrated, they get emotional, they're tired, right? And a tired body is a body that's having to work way too hard. And so we can measure that on this scan that is on this upper down portion here. When they plot down here, that's where their system is working too hard. Now, with kids that struggle with sensory processing disorder, this often shows up way down here on this graph because their brain is working extra hard to interpret the world around them from a sensory sense. And that drains their tank. That's why sensory processing kiddos, they tend to be a little bit more anxious, a little bit more emotional, a little bit more on edge. They might not sleep as well. All those things go with sensory processing disorder simply because the nervous system is much more worn out. Then we can look at this scan from a side to side aspect as well, whether they're more over here on this left side of this crossbar here. This is the fight or flight side. It's called the sympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system, that's the sensory stuck side. That's when our bodies are just uptight and tense. And it just tells us to go, go, go. that we're in that fight or flight. And that's why so many sensory kids are. They're in that fight or flight. So we see so many kids that struggle with this and plot over on this side. Now, this right side is more of the rest and digest portion. Now, when we drift too far this way, though, that can sometimes show that that sensory system has been stuck for so long and now it's just burnt out. There is no gas left in the tank and it's absolutely tired. Either way, this test shows us and tells us so much about how a child's body is functioning from the inside and gives us a really unique data on how their sensory processing system is functioning. Now, to kind of summarize these scans, these two here, they show us where the stress is regionally. And that's important because that can help us as, pediatric chiropractors to target those areas and help that body be more efficient and more at ease. Secondly, this scan over here, say heart rate variability, really looks globally and tells us how much they've been struggling and really for how long. And that allows us to care for them and say, okay, here's the effort and the time we need to help unwind that sensory system. So here's the thing. I love to think of the spine and the nervous system as just a fuse box and as a fuse box in our house. If something goes out, you go check that fuse box, you turn it back on. And these scans, they help us measure that fuse box so that we can turn that back on. We can track and locate where the problem is, and we can find out how their sensory processing system is struggling. Now, making sure this system is fully functioning is the most important exam and assessment that you can do for your child, because sometimes they can't even tell you what's wrong. They just feel it deep inside their sensory system. If the nervous system isn't calm on the inside, in these scans, it's not going to be calm on the outside, and it's going to be coming out in the response of stress, of overwhelm, of sensory sensitivity or sensory seeking. Now these tests, they're extremely safe. They're not invasive. In fact, they only take about 10 to 15 minutes to do. They locate that subluxation, that stuck point, that stress in a child's central nervous system, and they help us as docs put together that customized care plan. Tell us the time and the frequency that we need to help your child's sensory system to really release all of that stress, start to rebuild, and start to make better neural patterns. So it really gets after the root cause. Now, if you're watching this video and you're like, man, we've tried absolutely everything, I really encourage you to try these three tests. They can often be the missing link in those sensory processing challenges. So if you have friends or family that struggle with sensory processing disorder, we would love if you would share this video. It just makes such a difference when we can tackle that sensory processing system really from the root cause. We can measure it, we can quantify it, we can help the body get an easier response by looking at what's going on the inside. So I hope this video finds you well, and I hope to see you soon.